Good evening. We've had a busy day today. First, decoding the budget and then tracking financial markets, obviously. Uh, while the equity markets, there were gains, and we had losses in the debt market. Equity, obviously, we're expecting Indian economy to recover. And naturally, once the growth rate is accelerating, then we expect the equity markets to go up. But at the same time, we saw debt yield going up, which is government borrowing rate in the secondary market going up, and which naturally meant that the debt investors would be the losers. And the reason we saw yields going up or the interest rates in the government securities going up is because fiscal deficit was at a higher level in the sense of in FRBM we are supposed to be working towards achieving a fiscal deficit of 3%. But naturally, given the pandemic, we obviously ended up with much higher rate. And in the next couple of years, we don't expect to reach the desired level as laid out in FRBM. Uh, to me, I won't worry about the fiscal deficit or increase in the yields or interest rates because at this stage, what matters is how well we are able to recover and are we able to put the economy on sustainable growth path. And as mentioned in my earlier conversation, it's important that the government invests today. So as the private sector doesn't really have the ability to invest. And our finance minister started her speech by discussing Atmanirbhar. I was hoping that she'll also talk about India being globally competitive. While Atmanirbhar was mentioned about 19 times, if I recall it right, global competitiveness was mentioned just once in the context of textile industry. But if India has to grow and we have to do well, we need to be globally competitive and participate in global value creation and value delivery. Our biggest advantage, as all of us know, is educated young population. And if we don't invest in this population and leverage in the international context, our Atmanirbhar will be uh, not very different from what we have attempted earlier in the past. That time we needed to do that because we were a poor country. Today we are at least low middle income country and we have resources to invest. And our population is far uh, better placed than it was in, let's say, 70s. And therefore, I was looking forward to allocations in innovation and driving productivity. And to my surprise, I didn't find. And even when the reference came to innovation, it was a 3-year-old fund that we were talking about, National Research Foundation investment. And now we're talking about investing about 50,000 crores and laying a roadmap for investing 50,000 crores. So that, in fact, was my first disappointment and probably one of the biggest disappointments that we are not loosening our strings to invest in ourselves because that's what matters in in the end. And then one question which came to my mind when I started looking at the detailed numbers, which is it's always a nightmare in any budget document because they run into hundreds of pages and a lot of accounting practices also you have to discover as you go along. So my first attempt was to look at the resource mobilization numbers to see if there is a recovery in place in the assumptions about the budget, about the resource mobilization in the budget. And I wasn't surprised when I saw these numbers uh, because it is one to think positive and discuss positivity. And second is to look at what our reality is and then build on that reality. So what surprised me was that GST is expected to grow only, GST collections are expected to grow only by 5.2% over 2020. Corporate tax is supposed to degrow by 1.8%, which means our collections in 2022 will be lower than collections in 2020 by about 1.8%. And individual taxes, tax on individuals is expected to grow by 14%. Now, to me, that's all. That's a one. signal it sends me saying we are not on way to recovery. We're not on way to growing from here. We are probably still going to struggle. Government's own assumptions are saying that. And then coming to investments that we are making for ourselves, again, I think it's government probably has chosen to underinvest in my mind because economic infrastructure on transportation there's an increase of about 7%. Telecom there's a significant increase. I think about 20,000 crore is being given to telecom additional, and that most probably will be the investment which will go into BSNL. And I think we need that investment because need public sector telecom business also to be there. We can't expect that business only to be run in the private sector. So economic infrastructure, yes, telecom was a big positive. Transportation to me, 7% is not something which is significant. On the social infrastructure, there was a probably bigger surprise to my mind, and not a positive surprise. In education, we have an increase of 9.6% over the last year. But last year's expenditure, which is 2019, 2019-20, or sorry, 21. Now this will be the last year. Is lower than the previous year. So effective increase in education is only 4.2%. While Home Minister talked about education, talked about investment, talked about NEP, but if you look at the allocation, it's only been an increase of 4.2% over 2 years. Health was even bigger surprise. We have a negative allocation or degrowth in healthcare allocation of 9.5%. And though over last 2 years it's about 17%, which is about 8.5% per year, and that does beat inflation. But I was expecting, given finance minister's conversation, I was expecting that there will be a larger allocation because COVID has exposed our weakness in healthcare, and we knew that two-thirds of our healthcare expenditure is in private through the private means, which is households pay two-thirds, and the government spends only one-third. I was hoping the government will take this opportunity to invest in healthcare, but unfortunately, that's not really happened. Then there is a sharp increase in subsidies, particular food subsidy during last year, which is this year, 2021. And there's a significant decline in 21-22 in terms of allocation. So I'm not sure how such a big increase can come in 1 year and then decrease will happen the next year. We probably read a little more of the fine print. And this is all relating to FCI. While there was a reference by the Home Minister to FCI, but we couldn't really decode what accounting treatment is being given. I'm aware that FCI wasn't getting the subsidy payments were getting for many years. They were all delayed. So there's a possibility that cleanup has happened this year, so therefore the subsidy is higher. And the next year, obviously, there's no cleanup, so subsidy is naturally going to be lower. Right. So to me, we'll have to look into a little more detail in terms of what the subsidy decline is. But given that the economic recovery is taking time, and it'll still take more time, maybe a couple of years before we go back to sustainable 6% kind of a number. I won't withdraw subsidies at this stage, or I won't make any major changes in subsidies. And if the government is contemplating any major changes in subsidies, it's going to impact our livelihoods in some ways or our health for a large number of people in another way. Right? So I think as far as expenditure is concerned, I was expecting the government to be a little more courageous because survey had mentioned that, and finance minister also had mentioned saying we're not worried about fiscal deficit. So if it was a little more courageous, it would have given us more confidence in terms of putting the economy back to path of growth. So it is, to my mind, one of those situations where the government has chosen to be conservative while saying that they're not conservative. Because Madam Minister later on also mentioned saying we are spending and we are spending. And that doesn't seem to be the case to my mind at all. Because the overall budget has increased by 0.95% over the last year, right? And since we are still in recovery phase, that increase is effectively a shrinkage in the budget because inflation adjusted will be negative. right? That's what it is. And then next step obviously is how do we look at the financial system, because one is government spending, two is private spending, three obviously is credit-led growth. There also, unfortunately, I was disappointed, and I was terribly disappointed in some ways, because we only have an additional allocation of 20,000 crores to public sector banks. They need much more because we know NPAs are going to grow only because of pandemic now. Even if we've cleaned up the quality of credit, pandemic is causing problems in terms of credit quality. So I was expecting not only to clean up the past mess of sort, but the pandemic related NPA also will need capital in the public sector banking system, because a lot of those NPAs are in the public sector once more. So therefore, 20,000 crore is a fairly small amount to help public sector banks grow. And even when you want to privatize, it is absolutely necessary that we privatize these banks in a state where we get a good value. These banks have a great infrastructure, they have good people, they have large client base. So there's no point in selling these banks cheap just because I've decided to privatize. Right. So, and then comes infrastructure financing, which is the new DFI, which is Development Financial Institution providing long-term credit. Once again, I think my assessment is that 20,000 crore, even if it's coming as an equity in 1 year, is hardly any money given the kind of requirement we have infrastructure. Because Minister herself had mentioned an amount of 111 lakh crores. Now, if my infrastructure requirements over the next few years are 111 lakh crores, and private sector doesn't have much equity at all, which is equity starved in our case, providing 20,000 crore of equity capital is negligible. It's not really going to make major difference in terms of kickstarting infrastructure projects in the Indian context. So if I now sort of try looking at the entire budget in a sort of a single document, morning my sense was okay. There was a sense of relief saying there are no major surprises. But now if I look back, I I do see there is a surprise that we are underinvesting. We should have been a little more confident that we will recover and our revenue mobilization will be better, and therefore we should be willing to spend, because given the state of economy and given the state of households, government of India needs to step up and make these investments. And unless we can do that, we're going to delay our own recovery. And fiscal deficit really doesn't matter, because we are a sovereign country. We can print our own currency, and we don't borrow internationally, so we borrow domestically. Indian household on average, if he earns well or she earns well, we save. So availability of capital for government finance shouldn't have been a problem and won't be a problem to my mind. So I think we've just been too conservative, or I won't even mind saying we probably lack confidence, saying the recovery is on our way, and therefore we haven't been willing to invest in ourselves. Thank you.